Life is a terminal illness which is sexually transmitted, says the very esteemed John Cleese. You are dying. I am too. From the moment we are born, our cells are dying, and they continue to do so throughout our life. So if dying is always a part of our living, doesn't it only seem logical then that we spend some time thinking about it, planning for it, and talking about it? And just maybe that might help us to live life more fully. And who doesn't want that? Unlike many hospice palliative care providers, I've worked most of my life in dying and death. I was recruited or indoctrinated, your call, when I was an undergrad. Way back when, I actually was interested in adolescent mental health, and I had my eye on a particular clinical placement, until one of my professors approached me and said, "You know what, Kath? We've got something a little bit different in mind for you. And what do you think about death?" I remember at the time thinking, what does anyone think about death? But I kept my mouth shut, and before I knew it, I found myself as the inaugural placement student in a brand new hospice palliative care unit in Ontario Hospital. And I loved it. We laughed more than we cried. We never doubted that the work we were doing was meaningful. And we could talk about the kind of stuff that most people would run to the hills rather than discuss. I am so grateful to be part of the hospice palliative care community. But every once in a while, I poke my head out and I look around and I realize that not everyone thinks about dying and death quite the way that we do. Now, to be fair, Canadians should and will be talking an awful lot about dying and death in the next few years as we come to grips with the direction from the Supreme Court of Canada on medically hastened death. But how are we talking about it? Who's leading these discussions? And where are we heading? In all pockets of society, we continue to struggle to have the kind of conversations that will allow us to have quality of living until we die. And this has to change now. I remember quite clearly the very first day of my PhD program. There we were, a group of emerging scholars sitting in a circle, a bit like kindergarten, but exciting nonetheless, ready to share our research ideas and how we wanted to impact the world around us. People would share their ideas, other people would critique, offer feedback, suggest more stuff to read, the usual. When it was my turn, I leaned into this great group of people and I said, I want to study death education. And there was silence. I heard crickets. Finally, one of my profs, a seemingly kind and gentle soul, he said, so you want to study deaf education. You want to work with the hearing impaired. No, I said, I'm talking death, dying, dead, death. And again, there were more crickets. And that's when I realized that maybe we are all a bit hard of hearing when it comes to talking about dying and death. Because after all, denial ain't just a river in Egypt. So sure, the reception of my research idea was a little bit disheartening. I was proposing spending the next 5 or so years on something that apparently no one wanted to talk about. I might have considered giving up on death, so to speak, if I hadn't already had the experience of being shot down, of hearing crickets when I tried to talk about dying before, when I tried to talk about my own dying. You see, the year before, 12 days before I was supposed to be in that very first PhD class, I was diagnosed, somewhat out of the blue, with cancer. I was 37 at the time. mother of 2 vibrant and active children, a wife, and an educator, and had managed to house a rather large and malignant tumor that had the distinct potential to put a rather large kink into my educational plans, let alone my life. I was promptly referred to a fabulous surgeon, one of the best in her field in Canada. And on the day I was supposed to be beginning my PhD course was the day of my initial meeting with my surgeon. I wanted her to hear me out. I wanted her to tell her that I was scared I was going to die and I wasn't going to have the chance to be a mother to my children anymore. And I wanted her to know what I should have been doing that day instead. But she didn't ask me. She didn't ask if I was scared. Instead, she told me in no uncertain terms, if you are going to get cancer, this is the kind to get. Unfortunately, this occurred right after I told her my aunt had died of the very same disease when she was only a few years older than me. When I finally got at the guts to tell my surgeon, I'm scared, I'm worried I'm going to die, she shot me down. She said, "You are not going to die. Do not talk that way." And she was right. I didn't. And I am incredibly grateful for the role that that surgeon played in saving my life. But I still wish one of the multitude of healthcare providers that I encountered during my time with cancer would have talked about the elephant in the room with me. I could have died. My aunt did. I'd cared for many who had died of the very same disease. I needed someone to hear me out, to let me take ownership of my living until I die. And that is what I want for each and every one of us. I want us to feel a sense of control. I want us to feel heard. And I want us to be able to create environments where we can have discussions that allow us to talk about our dying amidst our life and living. And now it's pretty safe to say that each and every one of you is going to become intimate with dying and death at least once in your life. But the way we approach this tends to be a bit crazy-making. On one hand, we like to think we live in a death-denying and death-defying society. When someone we love dies, we are granted a few moments to grieve, to mourn, and then we are kicked right back into the overdrive that is our life. We are told to get over the person who has died and get on with our living because it is easier on those around us. And on the other hand, it seems a bit ironic to say that we live in a death-denying society to anyone who's turned on the TV or watched a movie lately. But the kind of dying that I'm wanting us to talk about does not involve vampires or zombies, and it does not only happen halfway around the world to other people. The kind of dying we need to be talking about is a normative life event that will one day happen to me and it will one day happen to you. Our attitudes also influence the language we use around dying and death. Sometimes we misuse the D words, death, dying, and death. And we find ourselves saying things like, "Oh, I'm dying of thirst," or "I'm so dead tired," when those things are fairly easily fixed. Or other times, we couch our language in euphemisms, flowery words, as if to cover up the reality that we are somewhat fearful of our own mortality. Take a moment now and think about some of your own favorite euphemisms for dying and death. Passed away, the big leap, transitioned on. Now let's crank things up a bit and get a little bit more cruder and a little bit more fun. Croaked, kicked the bucket, snuffed out, 6 feet under. There's tons. But how is any of this better than calling dying and death what it really is? And in fact, by not using the proper words, what we are doing, we are isolating ourselves from the experience of dying and death. And instead, we are left alone to grapple about our fears. And it is normal to fear dying and death. We need to have a healthy relationship with it. And one of the reasons we struggle with having this healthy relationship is that we lack in-depth education. And that is depth, not depth. We lack in-depth education. In all formalized systems of our education, we have managed to leave it out of our curriculum, including healthcare education, where we just do a smattering of it for those people who we think might be caring for us at the end of life. But we still are exposed to a great deal of informal death education as we see other people react to it, as we watch and model other people's behavior. Think for yourself for a moment. Who was your first death educator? What was your take-home message? And how is that message serving you now? We need to recognize that scientific advances have made death a medicalized event. But it's not. It's a human experience. It is a social process. But we have over-medicalized our dying and given it to the hands of our healthcare providers, a well-meaning group of people, but who are ill-equipped to deal with it. Birth used to be over-medicalized as well, but it has been taken back, and now women claim ownership in the birthing process and will more often than not talk about feeling a sense of control, that they had some choice in where they gave birth and who was present, and speak to feeling empowered because they had the opportunity to learn about it, read about it, and share stories with other women. We need to take back our dying as well. Our healthcare system is excellent for what ails us is fixable. I'm evidence to that. But when what ails us is no longer fixable, our healthcare system will tell us there's nothing more that we can do. But there is a great deal that we can do in preparation for our dying. And it starts with talking about it, and it extends to creating compassionate communities that have the capacity to step up in a caring way when we need them. So I bet today isn't a good day for you to die, and I'm hopeful that tomorrow won't be either. But maybe today is a day for you to start breaking some of those barriers and have some of those important conversations with those that you love. Give yourself a gift and give those that you love a gift, and spend some time thinking about, what do you think will be important to you at the end of your life? Where might you want to die? And who will be taking care of you? Canadians are going to be talking an awful lot about this over the next few years, so please pay attention and have your own conversations. We owe it to all Canadians to show them that how we die matters. We owe it to people like one of the very first women that I had the privilege of caring for on a hospice unit. She told me on no uncertain terms that she was too young to die, yet everyone treated her like she was too old to live. She was 94. We owe it to our children who are not born being fearful or confused by death. In fact, they're really curious about it. But we confuse them with our poor choice of language and our ability to communicate about it. We need to have clear and gentle conversations with our children. We owe it to those teens and tweens who find themselves in dark movie theaters sobbing because one of their favorite characters, such as Augustus in A Fault in Our Stars, dies. We need to make sure we're not just letting our movies and our books do all of our death education for us. We owe it to our First Nations communities who are doing important work as they figure out how end-of-life care can help to serve their elders to die at home in a way that respects their traditional ways. We owe it to that person who inevitably calls to each and every radio show on euthanasia and tells us that we treat our animals better than we do our human beings because when they get old and sick, we kill them. We owe it to our healthcare providers who are just beginning to figure out how to allow natural death and when to make appropriate referrals to hospice palliative care, but now need to navigate the waters with medically hastened death. And we owe it to all those baby boomers who are coming up en masse, who will have high expectations that they will receive excellent end-of-life care. We owe it to all of us. So please, encourage those who love you and your healthcare providers to ask you questions such as, what's important to you in life? What are you fearful about in terms of getting ill, about medical care, about the end of your life? And if you had to choose between quality of living and quantity of life, what would you choose and why? As Arianna Huffington writes in her book Thrive, there may be no single thing that can teach us more about life than death. So let's break those barriers. Let's make those conversations happen. And please, get talking. Thank you.